Chapter 23, Recollections of an Army Surgeon, Dalton, New York, July 1st, 1899. James R. Bowen, dear friend and comrade. Before I was taken sick last winter, I had made up my mind what to write for your history. I have not yet recovered my strength, but I will write as well as I can, a little at a time. We got into camp at Suffolk, Virginia at about 11 o'clock at night, September 12th, 1862. Early the next morning, I went with Colonel Thorpe to General Ferry's headquarters and protested against remaining in that camp and asked for hospital accommodations. We were told that we were to do the best we could for a hospital, that we must not take possession of any building for fear of offending the owner, and that we must remain in that camp. In spite of my best efforts day and night, by the middle of December, 130 of the regiment were sick in hospitals, as many more were sick in camp, and 32 had died. I had feared all this and had foretold it to our medical director, Dr. Gall, Surgeon 13th Indiana, unless he allowed my requisition for hospital building. You remember the barn our sick were in. I took that in violation of General Ferry's instructions. I wanted, as I explained to Gall, a building in which I could have fires to meet the coming cold nights. He, Gall, rejected my requisitions for hospital room and also for blankets, and cut down my requisitions for quinine. About that time, General Peck took the place of General Ferry. I went at once and alone to him, and after a good deal of talk with his adjutant general, a very good-looking man by the name of Foster, who insisted on my doing with him what business I had to transact with General Peck, all of which I knew was correct enough, I was admitted to the presence of General Peck. The door was ajar between the general's room and Foster's, and the general, hearing our conversation, ordered me into his room. I laid my case from the beginning before him as well as I could in my weak way, preferred charges against Gall, and was told that the thing should be looked into. Next morning, Dr. D.W. Hand came to our camp and told me he had been ordered by General Peck to report to me for duty as medical director. He said he had looked over the camp and wanted to look no farther. He said to me, "Make your requisition for such buildings as you want and for medicines and blankets, and take an officer and look up a place for a new camp." I took Colonel Thorpe, and you know what a wonderful camp we had on the other side of Suffolk. And just 2 weeks after we changed camp, there were only 9 sick in the regiment. The camp was absolutely clean, and when Dr. Eden Dalton came round as medical inspector, he found the men clean personally and reported them and their camp in better sanitary condition than any other in his division. He was afterward medical inspector on Grant's staff with rank of colonel, and in his last report he declared our regiment preeminently superior to any other in the service in hygienic conditions. Aside from Dr. Hand, he was by far the best medical officer I ever met. They are both dead. Hand died at St. Paul, Minnesota, where he practiced after the war, and Dalton at San Antonio, Texas, where he went in company with Charles Lee Fitzhugh for his health. Dalton died there of consumption. Fitzhugh was the one who commanded our regiment near the last of its fighting. The boys were feeling badly about being commanded by a stranger. Thorpe was a prisoner, and Scott was wounded in half a dozen places. I told the men that they would be led, not followed, that Fitzhugh was a nephew of the old doctor whom I knew, and that they were all fighting stock. He will lead you, and you will make him a brigadier. Expect nothing less of him or yourselves. It turned out as I had predicted. The men could not say enough in his praise, and he was promptly promoted. Dr. Hand asked all the surgeons in Peck's division to state in their next monthly report their opinions as to what was the best antiseptic and the best preventives of fevers and allied diseases. I gave my views on chloride of lime and the very few antiseptics we then had, and then said that with all of them, but without cleanliness, they would be useless. But absolute cleanliness without the so-called antiseptics was all sufficient. My idea was adopted and believed in by the profession under Dr. Hand. I had been preaching the gospel of cleanliness for years, claiming on Paul's authority that it was akin to godliness, and on my own experience that as a sanitary measure it was worth a dozen of godliness. One day when the flies were eating the horses in camp and everything was black with them, Dr. Hand came into my hospital, noticing that there were no flies in either hospital building and Keeling House or Oddfellows Hall. He asked me how I got rid of them. I told him I starved them out by cleanliness, which was true. The men were proud of their hospital and proud of their camp. Dr. Dalton told me that several of the men, when he was inspecting their quarters, lifted the valances to their bunks, saying that their surgeon told them to invite his attention to the fact that their dark corners were clean. Dalton was also highly pleased with the fact that when he came to inspect them, they were drawn up in line and saluted him as a regiment should. After we had got the camp as clean as possible, there was still the smell of the sinks that was disgusting and must cause more or less disease. I felt all the time that the sinks were not only a nuisance but also a great menace to the health of the Army. I had tried several plans for getting rid of the offense, but without success. At last I asked Colonel Gibbs to have 5 men from each company detailed to take spades and go at reveille to the sinks and put into them about an inch of earth spread evenly. Gibbs, who never failed to let me have anything I asked for, had the men detailed. He said I might try it, but would fail, as that odor was inseparable from the Army. I asked him if there was anything sacred about it, for if there was, I would stop fighting and damning it. He said it was not exactly the odor of sanctity, but it might properly be called the patriotic odor, and it would stay by us as long as we were sufficiently patriotic to remain in the Army. The next morning I noticed that it was gone. I had conquered. I said nothing, but thought I would wait and see if Colonel Gibbs would notice it. After 2 or 3 days, I was passing through camp when the colonel hailed me and requested me to go over to his quarters. I went and found Dr. Hand there. Then the colonel said to me, "Dr. Hand wants to know where you got the idea of putting earth into the sinks every morning," both declaring it a perfect success and the finest thing the medical department had done for the Army since this was a government. I said to Dr. Hand that I was glad he had asked that question, for it gave me an opportunity for the first time of referring to a work that Colonel Gibbs did not know more about than I did, that I felt almost certain that the colonel had never read the book from which I got that idea. "What," said the colonel, "might be the title of the book?" I spelled it to him, Bible. Then, after consigning my immortal part to a temperature warmer than Suffolk, he inquired, to the great amusement of Dr. Hand, if I claimed to be a more devout Christian than he. "God forbid," I said. He sent his orderly into his tent for his Bible. That and the revised Army regulations always lay on his table. He handed me the book, saying as he did so, "If you will find anything bearing on this subject in that book, you shall have a basket of champagne." I had not seen the passage for 25 years, nor thought of it until about 2 minutes before, but as good luck would have it, I opened into the 23rd chapter of Deuteronomy, turned one leaf, and saw what I wanted. I put my finger on the 13th verse and warily passed it to the colonel. He saw it and instantly said, "I give it up, I give it up," and passed the book to Dr. Hand, who laughed when he read it till his legs gave out and he sat down on the ground. Hand issued an order at once to all the surgeons under him to go and do likewise. Dix's medical director Gilbert followed Hand, and finally the practice became universal throughout the Army. The earth closet is now very generally used in this country since, soon after its adoption by our regiment, our minister to Japan, Harris by name, told us all about its use in Japan. Harris was a scientist sent to Japan by President Pierce at the instance of William L. Marcy. We left Suffolk about June 22nd, 1863, after which your medicine man had, except surgery, comparatively little to do for his own regiment. After parading up and down the peninsula from the latter part of June to the forepart of July, we were hurried toward Gettysburg after the fight was over, instead of going into Richmond as one good regiment could have done, and held it too if Gettysburg had been fought and followed up in Grant or Sheridan fashion. We got back to Warrenton about August 1st, 1863, and there received our transfer to cavalry dated July 28th, 1863. We had plenty of fighting until about the middle of December, when we went into camp at Mitchell's Station, Virginia. May 4th, 1864, we moved out of camp and crossed the Rapidan on the 5th, got up to Chancellorsville House on the 6th, and on the 7th got into our great fight at Todd's Tavern. On the night of the 8th, a man came to me from Company H, sent by Colonel Gibbs, to say we had lost in killed and wounded 86 men. This was the first fight in which I had not been with the men. An arrangement had been made by all the doctors in the division, and the medical director, Dr. Roger Pease, no one but me opposing, by which I was kept from accompanying my regiment. The plan worked so badly that it was never tried again. The medical director was to appoint a doctor from each brigade, who was to hold his position 1 month, whose duty should consist in taking charge of all the medical supplies, hospital tents, medical wagons, and the like, and establishing a brigade hospital. All the wounded of his brigade were expected to come to his hospital. At the end of a month, another doctor of the brigade was to take the first one's place, and so on. I was the first man appointed. During this fight, Todd's Tavern, among over 2,000 infantry that came to my hospital, I saw but one cavalryman, and he was from Custer's brigade. The same plan was tried in our war with Spain and Cuba, and the same confusion and failure were the result. While lying at Manassas learning the cavalry drill, Benjamin F. Fairchild of Company C broke himself of a bad habit. He was a model soldier in every respect but one. He would do no work on Sunday, for conscience' sake, consequently spent all his Sundays in the guardhouse. One Saturday, the colonel, after teaching us to fold our blankets, put them on the horse, and put on and take off the saddle, announced the lesson for the next day. He would teach us the mount. Next morning, Fairchild was on hand with the rest for his lesson. Of course, the boys wanted to know what ailed him, why he was not in the guardhouse, and asked if he knew it was Sunday. When they had stopped long enough to let him speak, he said he understood from the colonel last night that today there was to be a Sermon on the Mount, and he was anxious to hear it. He was never in the guardhouse again. He was wounded at Todd's Tavern and transferred to the Veteran Reserve Corps, as good a soldier as the best. Even his failings leaned to virtue's side. On the evening of May 8, 1864, I was ordered by General Grant through the medical director to get all my wounded to Fredericksburg, 10 miles from where we were. I had no transportation, not so much as a wheelbarrow, but I took possession of every ambulance and army wagon I could find and got the wounded all down there by noon of the 9th. On the way to Fredericksburg, I came up with our regiment, started on the Richmond raid. I also saw in ambulances a good many of the wounded of our regiment on their way to Fredericksburg. I got my wounded all made comfortable and then began to carry out another order of General Grant's. Dr. Dalton was in Fredericksburg and gave me the order to gather in the wounded from the wilderness. I spent the next 6 or 7 days at that. I would take all the ambulances and army wagons I could find, and on the way out, passing through where the slaughtering of cattle was going on, would have 6 or 8 quarters of beef loaded on and would distribute that and bread among the wounded whom I had to leave behind so that none of them suffered for food. I brought in a good many wounded Confederates. The wounded on both sides were in very serious straits for a week, and they would have suffered much more than they did, and some would have starved, but for the Negroes. When the fight was going on in the wilderness, I have the impression it was the day our regiment was fighting at Todd's Tavern, May 7th, but it may have been the 6th. General Getty came to my hospital, wounded in the shoulder. The collarbone was not broken, but it had been hit, and the shoulder torn up a good deal. I inquired of him after General Wadsworth. He said he saw him a minute before he left the lines in front of his command, his head down nearly to his horse's neck to keep clear of the branches, and in a hail of bullets that he did not believe a hummingbird could live in a minute. About half an hour afterward, I saw Craig Wadsworth riding by my hospital tent and asked him after his father. He said he was mortally wounded, was probably dead already. I still think this was on the 7th, and General Wadsworth lived till the morning of the 8th. That is what the Confederates at the hospital where he died told me when I was hunting up his body, which I did after the wounded had all been brought in. I found it buried in the dooryard of a man whose name I think was McCracken. I ordered it sent to Fredericksburg, and when it arrived there, went in company with General Wadsworth's son-in-law, Major Ritchie, who was then in Fredericksburg sick of the disease of which I have been told he afterward died, and identified the body. We made it as decent as we could for sending home and sent it. I spent 3 weeks at Fredericksburg, and on May 29th, after we had sent all the wounded north, the town was evacuated. Dr. Pease and a colonel of the regulars, whose name I have forgotten, with 11 soldiers and myself, started to rejoin the army. Once on the way, about an hour before sundown, we were fired at by guerrillas. There were probably not more than a dozen of them at the outside, but I think I never saw 2 more frightened men than the colonel and Dr. Pease. The privates seemed to take it as a matter of course. The colonel and Dr. Pease both asked, "What shall we do?" I, having no military knowledge except what I had learned of Colonel Gibbs, said, "Charge," and started for them and the 11 privates with me. They shot a lot of ammunition in the direction of those who had fired at us, but we never saw them after the first half-minute. On the afternoon of the next day I reached the regiment. The Polish that they had taken on while in camp at Mitchell's Station was worn off. I expected that, but I was a little surprised at Colonel Gibbs's appearance. He showed hard service. This was the first time I had ever seen anything on his head but a clean regulation cap. He had on now a badly demoralized, very limber wool hat. He saw what I was thinking and began on me with quoting Hamlet, "Angels and ministers of grace, defend us. Be thou a spirit of health or goblin damned. Bring with thee airs from heaven or blasts from hell. Be thy intents wicked or charitable. Thou comest in such a questionable shape that I will speak to thee. I'll call thee Smokestack Blackjack." I only asked him what he had done with his cap, and he did not tell me. About an hour from the time I reached the regiment, we moved to what I think was called Ruffin's Farm. We turned our horses into clover, and were having a good rest when in about half an hour, a very lively rattle of musketry on the hill beyond us called us to boots and saddles. Up the hill we went and charged on foot and whipped a company of Confederates under General Hoke that had just whipped 2 regular regiments and 1 volunteer regiment. One of the regular regiments went in with us without their officers, Captain Schweitzer refusing to fight. Barrager of company. I was killed in this fight. Old Church, May 30th, 1864. We fought them back the next day to Cold Harbor, and on the morning of June 1st, we slaughtered them fearfully and held the line until the 6th Corps came to our relief. I saw Captain Randall's son, James, who came up with the 6th Corps that morning, and shook hands with him. He was going in with his regiment as we came out. He was killed about an hour after I last saw him. He was a model soldier. We stayed about there until after the 3rd, and then started on our Trevilian raid. It's the hardest of all our raids. After fighting near Trevilian Station on June 11th, 12th, we came back on the night of the 12th and forenoon and part of the afternoon of the 13th, when we crossed a stream and went into camp for a rest. We bathed ourselves and cleaned our horses and rested until next morning. I bathed in the mill pond. I noticed the colonel's colored servant provided him with a wash tub and water, which he carried to his tent. Shortly after taps, I found 5 or 6 rods from the colonel's tent, a place that suited me, and lay down for all night. It was a magnificent night, and I could do better than sleep for the first hour or two. After about half an hour, Colonel Gibbs came tripping toward me, calling me very carefully as if anxious to waken none but me. To add to his happiness, I pretended to be asleep. He always delighted in waking me at unseasonable hours, and after yawning asked, "What's up?" He said he wished to say something to me that must go no further, but "First," said he, "permit me to say I am no grumbler. You grumble for a whole brigade." I think I never saw him look so imposing, notwithstanding he had on nothing but his regulation cap, a tight-fitting knitted undershirt and drawers, and a pair of slippers, a dress not well calculated to add to one's dignity of appearance. When he thought me properly prepared to hear, he remarked that it seemed to him that not even Solomon in all his glory was arrayed like one of these. I lived through that, and on the night of July 3rd we got into camp at Lighthouse Point. Our camp was in the woods, a bad place always for a camp. However, the trees were not many, and after cutting out all the small stuff and cleaning out, we had a rather fine camp in which we rested 3 weeks. While there, I managed to find 4 or 5 cans of tomatoes, and some of the men were seen eating the tomato. Soon an order came to our camp forbidding the eating of anything of that sort without the permission of an assistant surgeon, who was at Merritt's headquarters. I rode over to Lighthouse Landing and found Dr. Dalton, who took me to Grant's headquarters. He introduced me to the general, and after my story about the tomato business, wrote an order to the president of the Sanitary Commission, which then lay at the landing, loaded with good things. The order read somewhat like this: "Give the bearer everything he asks for. Let him have without stint. He is of our kind, and knows how to use any supplies you may give him." Dr. Dalton signed it and handed it to General Grant, who signed it and handed it to me with a smile. I read it and thanked them. By the way, I met and made the acquaintance of a good many officers during my term of service, but I never knew one less pretentious than Grant. I took my order to the Sanitary Commissioner, and they ordered round a tugboat and loaded it with everything good. Lots that I knew no name for, and finally brought up some tripe, the first I had ever seen. I got a large supply, but it was all used to good advantage, curing the men of diarrhea and threatened scurvy. On the way back from the Darbytown fights, Colonel Gibbs lost his meerschaum. That reminds me of one of his peculiarities. He always set the example to his men of instant and unquestioning obedience of orders. While we were in Suffolk, his eyes became inflamed, and as he was smoking a good deal and the smoke irritated his eyes, I told him they would do better if he would stop smoking. "Is that an order?" asked the colonel. "Yes, if you can," I answered. I thought no more of it until we were lying at Mitchell's Station. While there, General Wadsworth gave a dinner to the officers of his division, to which Gibbs was invited because his regiment was in good part of Livingston County men. Gibbs ate some pickled salmon, and it gave him gout. He was commanding the brigade, and sent for me. I soon had his big toe feeling better. I proposed smoking with him and filled my pipe, and asked him where his was. He answered, "In my trunk. When my eyes were inflamed at Suffolk, you ordered me to stop smoking. I always obey orders." I then ordered him to smoke, and he did so. He never used tobacco in any other way. The colonel, as you know, had a remarkable gift of expression, could use English very skillfully. While we were at Suffolk, a second lieutenant, I forget his name and company, who was as good a man as there was in the regiment, but could not learn the tactics, could not be military to save his life, was advised to resign, and he did so. I was shown the colonel's endorsement, and it read something like this: "The martial germ is so feebly developed in this young man that long before he can possibly be of any use as a soldier, the result of the contest in which we are engaged will have become ancient history." Another case was that of a medical officer. Gibbs was commanding the brigade, and I told him the doctor wished to resign, but was afraid he could not get off. It was a time when every officer was needed, and it was very difficult to get out of the service. The doctor was a good enough man to draw his pay. He would stand up and face the paymaster like a man, but Gibbs had noticed the fact that his toes always pointed away from the heaviest firing, in fact, that he could not help being a bad example of cowardice. So when I told the colonel of his wish to resign, he said, "Bring his tender of resignation, and I will endorse it in such a way that he will need no certificate of non-indebtedness from the Ordnance Department. I will endeavor to eclipse the martial germ." I carried the resignation over to the colonel the next morning and was turning to come away when he ordered me back, saying he had an endorsement for that document which he wished to submit for my criticism, and handed me the following. "It is believed by the officers of his regiment and also by myself that the playful arts of peace and the quiet pursuits of a rural practitioner are more congenial to the taste of this officer than are the stirring events of the tented field and the shock and turmoil of battle. After the Battle of Winchester, our men brought into camp a white horse belonging to the rebel General McCausland. I removed a piece of shell about 2 inches square from the side of his head and soon began to ride him. The boys called him McCausland, and he was a fine saddle horse. I rode him on the Gordonsville raid. On that raid, the regiment was commanded by Major Scott and the brigade by Colonel Kellogg, who had tendered his resignation and knew it had been accepted. He was a West Pointer and a very jolly fellow, but I thought not anxious to get into a muss and get hurt, or worse, just at the very last. On the very cold night at Liberty Mills, we fought the enemy into a swamp and next morning chopped out 2 rebel guns. Those we brought back, the only things our army had to show for the raid. We ran against the Confederates again the next day, December 23rd, 1864, but did no fighting. The enemy were too well posted. We were on high ground, which sloped for about half a mile to a stream, beyond which the bank rose very steep, from 12 to 25 or 30 feet. I rode, I should say, over a mile up and down parallel with that stream, run, and with the help of a field glass could see nothing but the farther bank of the run, lined with the enemy. Our people had sent out a skirmish line, and they went as far as they could and lay down to be shot at. After a while, a man came to Kellogg's headquarters and said that a man down on the skirmish line had been wounded in the abdomen and wanted the old doctor. He refused to die unless the old doctor said he must. I said I guessed he meant me. "Yes, you are the one he wants." "All right," I replied, and mounted McCausland when Colonel Kellogg ordered me to stay where I was. I said I hated to disobey orders for the first time, but I should certainly go. He said something about a court-martial, and I said something about a sweet time punishing an officer for such an act, under Sheridan's command. I left my orderlies behind and galloped down to the wounded man. 2 or 3 bullets sung by me, and 6 or 8 rods from the man old Mac wheeled round with me. A ball had taken out a small piece of skin from the top of his neck with the mane that grew on it. He went on to where the man lay. I dismounted, threw up my hand to the men beyond the brook, and said, "Hold on, boys, till I see how badly this man is hurt." The firing ceased, and in 5 minutes at least 50 men on the farther bank of the run were visible where one was before. I motioned to men on the skirmish line in both directions. They came, and we rolled the opposite edges of a blanket round 4 carbines, and on that 6 men carried the man. The ball had struck him in the abdomen and passed round him under the skin and out near the backbone. He could have walked back without injury. The whole skirmish line in front of our brigade withdrew at the same time, and no shot was fired. Kellogg said that was the slickest way to get a skirmish line out of a bad fix that he had ever seen. I started back last, and as I was about to mount, my horse took occasion to thank the Confederates for their gentlemanly forbearance, intimating that I knew by that they were brave men. Pascal Jackson, whom you will remember as a very clean-looking orderly of General Merritt's, was telling me yesterday what he saw of our fighting June 4, 1864. Pass was but 16 then. He tells me you asked him to help carry some ammunition, which he did, and that you came up with the 4th New York Cavalry, Fiertney Ork, which had been ordered in to save weak places in our line, and their commander was telling them to co-right over poise. After repeating this order several times without effect, Pass says that you said, lead them, but he only repeated co-right over poise. You and he went on with your ammunition, you promising that you would report the cuss for cowardice. Pass has the impression that you did report him. I would like to know if you did, and the result. I know that Major Scott reported Captain Schweitzer for disobedience of orders and cowardice at Old Church, and nothing came of it, but he was a regular. Perhaps you would not be apt to get the following facts with regard to Major Scott as part of the general history of the regiment. On May 31st, 1864, the Major was fighting all day. I had a good deal to do, lots of the men and officers being wounded, some badly. Lieutenant Burr was wounded in the mouth, so that I told him I feared he would never sing again, but he did sing, and as well as ever, and I saw him at our wonderful reunion at Dr. Harrington's in Buffalo. Captain Leach, Company K, Captain A.K. Thorpe, Company F, and Captain Robinson, Company A, all had balls that carried away a little hair and some scalp. Major Scott came to my field hospital at night and helped until I made all of them comfortable and then let me know that he had a ball through his arm. Again, August 11th, 1864, at Newtown, Virginia, Scott had a severe wound, an ounce ball entering his back and passing over and fracturing his shoulder blade. He came to my hospital and was very cheerful, helping me and cheering the wounded until all were cared for, and then asked me if it were not about time to look to those who got wounded in the back. I think you will remember this same fight, as it was then that you came nearer to getting your final muster out than is pleasant for one's friends to contemplate. It was not the regulation testament or pack of cards that saved you, but a package of such documents as help one to write history. It turned out fortunately, and you had, till knocked out, an excellent opportunity to serve your country, an opportunity which you did not slight. Your account of the chance of shooting the enemy after you had become exhausted from carrying ammunition and obliged to lie down always reminded me of a remark of Cromwell's to his Parliament in his report of a certain fight. By the grace of God, we had the execution of them for 15 miles. In conclusion, I wish to say that if I had a better opportunity to serve my regiment than many surgeons had, it was because I had a colonel who was always more than willing to grant anything that I requested for the health and comfort of the men, and no colonel was ever better loved by his regiment than was Colonel Gibbs, Benjamin T. Nealand. It may not be generally known that Dr. Nealand was urgently requested by Sheridan to accept a position on his staff, but preferred to remain with the regiment. Some time ago, for use in my lecture on Army life, Dr. Nealand furnished me the following incidents. Early in the morning of September 19th, 1864, the day of the great Opequon or Winchester battle, William Kelly of Company F surrounded and brought in 5 lusty Johnnies. They were behind a rail pile, but Bill got the drop on them, and they, having a salutary respect for the Spencer carbine, quickly complied with the demand to surrender and came in on the trot. During the bloody Battle of Newtown, August 11th, 1864, George M. Durfee of Company the Y received a leaden missile. Striking him in front, it pierced the upper part of the left lung and passed through the entire body, making an ugly wound. Yet George is still on hand. You have reason to remember all about that fight. A very remarkable instance came under my observation. At the Battle of Newmarket Races, a 6th Massachusetts man, who fought on our right, received a bullet plumb through his right lung, yet was back again for duty in 3 weeks. During the siege of Suffolk, William H. Sibbald of Company F was shot through the bladder, and not only lived, but drove an ambulance after that to near the close of the war. Sidney Case of Company C was wounded about the same time. In this instance, the ball passed through the right lung, diaphragm, and liver. He also made a good ambulance driver to the end of the war. By special request of comrades, the following letter from Colonel Thorpe is given place. It was in response to Comrade Harrington's warm invitation to all dragoons to be his guests during the National GAR encampment at Buffalo, New York, August 23rd to 28, 1897. D.W. Harrington, M.D., 1480 Main Street, Buffalo, New York. My dear comrade, the eloquence of Hamilton, the patriotism of Washington, garnished and embellished with the rich hospitality of a John Hancock, could only compare with the splendor of your greeting to the old dragoons. The cordial, warm-hearted welcome tendered to his Ironsides by Cromwell at the close of the struggle of the Anglo-Saxon race to establish the English Commonwealth is one of the rare examples of goodness and greatness to which your magnificent preparation for the reception of our beloved comrades is a parallel. From the depths of my heart do I thank you for myself and for my patriotic wife, who will be present to witness and enjoy your kingly hospitality. Nay, more, I beg to thank you for your sincere and cordial welcome, extended in such generous terms to all of the gallant dragoons. No nation, no civilization has left us a record of such patriotism, such valor and courage as that which flowed like a river through the ranks of the 1st New York Dragoons. All drank from the inspiring waters, as did the valiant 300 who bent not the knee at the waters of the Jordan in pursuit of the rebellious hosts of Midian. The love of God, country, and liberty impelled the army of Gideon forward to victory. So did the same mighty forces sweep everything before the 1st New York Dragoons on 100 battlefields during the late Civil War. The patriotism of the Dragoons was not mere instinct, not a mere sentiment, but an enduring conviction, founded upon the imperishable principles announced in the Declaration of Independence that all rightful authority of law is founded upon the consent of the governed. Our dragoons were conscious of the fact that this republic had been founded by the will of our ancestors, and as their successors we had never given our consent to its destruction. Hence the dragoons took up arms to enforce the imperious urgence of self-defense, and their historic record is deep dyed with the ruddy glow of patriotism which kings may covet but cannot purchase with their crowns. For the record of the dragoons was written upon 50 battlefields in the white heat of heroism, and will perish only when the language we speak has perished, and the beautiful monument which you have erected to their glory has crumbled into dust. I am proud of our dragoons, their manly courage and fortitude, their unsullied record. I glory in the humble part which I performed among their mighty deeds of valor. I regret that I cannot be with you at the great reunion at Buffalo, but suffer me to give testimony to that love which I bear to you all, and to the memory of our immortal Scott, the bravest of the brave, who has won promotion to those celestial ranks which stand with harp in hand in awful grandeur dressed before the sapphire-clouded throne. Let us teach our sons and daughters to cultivate a patriotism rooted in right and grounded in justice, obedient to duty and consecrated to political purity, loyal to liberty and devoted to country, hallowed by Christian citizenship and blessed of God. Ever most fraternally yours, T.J. Thorpe, Forest Grove, Oregon, August 2nd, 1897.